Welcome to the second episode of the Artfully Learning audio series. I'm your host, Adam Zucker. In this episode, we're going to be talking about a unique art educational experience within a school. When I was growing up, one of the highlights of my school days was going on field trips to the museums in New York City. It was great to get out of the classroom and also experience the works of art that I had only seen before in reproductions from books that my parents and grandparents gave me. But what if every time you stepped into your school, you encountered great works of art? This is the case for one school that's less than 30 miles from New York City. New Rochelle High School in Westchester County has its own museum and cultural center called the Museum of Arts and Culture. It's the only Regents-chartered museum inside of a school in the state of New York. The Museum of Arts and Culture gives student artists a unique chance to encounter a spectrum of contemporary art practices by exhibiting the work of established professional artists who also serve as artists in residence. New Rochelle High School's Museum of Arts and Culture is part of the school's arts program, which integrates visual art, music, dance, and theater into its curricula, and gives students the option to major in the arts through its Performing and Visual Arts Education program. Joining me in conversation is arts educator, curator, and multidisciplinary artist Alexandra Brock. Alexandra has been teaching at New Rochelle High School since 1991, where she started the Visiting Artist Program with fellow educator Scott Siebold. The program has brought many renowned artists, critics, and museum professionals into the school. Thank you for joining me today, Alexandra.
Thank you for inviting me.
I'd like to start out by asking you about your earliest experiences and memories learning art.
Both my parents were artists, so I grew up in a household of creativity for sure. And we always had kind of paint and crayons and things like that around. My sister and I were 11 months apart, and then my other sister was born later when we were 7 and 8 years old. But we always had like a playroom that we were allowed to kind of draw on the walls in there. My mom would just paint over the walls every month or so. And we had a playhouse out in the yard that my dad built out of wood, and we would go out there and take tempera paint and paint it, and it would wash off in the rain, and we would do it again. And then in elementary school, the art class was always like my favorite that I looked forward to. And my parents were very involved with the Pelham Art Center, which is in Westchester County where I grew up. And I remember going there since I was a little kid taking, art classes and stuff. So I've always grown up around creativity.
So growing up in an artistic home definitely influenced the path you took to get where you are today. Is that correct?
Yes, for sure. I mean, my parents supported us on whatever we wanted to do, but both my sisters are creative. One is an actress and a designer, and the other is a set designer, but also a photographer. I think we all just went into creative fields.
I guess there's definitely an artistic gene in there, but it's also a combination of nature and nurture, too, I would imagine.
Yes, for sure. And I think also, when I went to School of Visual Arts in 1987, and I was actually quite surprised when I went in my freshman year how many students were there without the support of their families, because it just was never an issue with me. Like we wanted to go to art school, and my parents said great. And back then, a lot of my classmates, it was their second degree, or they were paying for it themselves. And now I've been teaching 30 plus years, and my first 10 years, if I had students that wanted to go to art school, it was kind of a big battle with their parents. But I think nowadays people understand that you can be creative and have a creative life and make a living at it, whereas maybe 20, 30 years ago, people just thought, the whole starving artist myth, people believe that.
Right, yeah. I've been delighted to see that change as well with STEAM and all these other innovations, within art education.
For sure.
And on that note, what motivated you to get into education?
That was kind of a fluke. Meanwhile, I had been teaching classes, assisting as a teenager at the Pelham Art Center, and I used to run, birthday parties, creative birthday parties for kids as a teenager, but I never really considered teaching until the end of freshman year at School of Visual Arts. They came around to the fine art department and said to us, hey, fine artists, you can minor in art therapy or art education. And art therapy seemed really, really interesting to me. At that time, the art therapy program was connected with Bellevue Hospital, and they were working with children that either had AIDS or children whose parents were AIDS patients, and that sounded really interesting to me. And it was just a scheduling conflict, and I couldn't sign up for it, so I signed up for education instead. And the teacher, Rose Cancel, the professor, we had about 40 students in the class on the first day. And she grouped us in groups of 3 and sent us out that week to go teach. And everybody went out and taught and had either a great or horrible experience. And the second week of class, there was down to 18 people. And she said, okay, now we can start. It was kind of trial by fire. And I really loved it. And I don't know, the bug bit me, and I just, it was just so rewarding and so exciting and so much fun. So I ended up double majoring in it. Now they have it as a 5th-year program, but at the time I did it as a double major.
There was this, I guess, stigma between being an artist and teaching, but you're someone who does both, and you do both very successfully, and you've actually integrated them in a unique way too.
I've been teaching. I got the teaching job right out of undergrad, and got my master's part-time at the same time as my first few years teaching at the college in Rochelle. And I was lucky Beverly Fishman was my professor there before she left and started the painting department, or continued being in charge of the painting department at Cranbrook. So she was wonderful. And I've always wanted to, continue my art making practice and teach. And I think the one thing I was trying to add into my teaching was the exposure to art, that even though I had an artistic family, my exposure was through my family and not through my education in public school. And I wanted to make that more accessible to my students, and for them to understand that that being creative could be part of your life in a very easy way, and that museums and galleries were not unapproachable and were not just for some elite group of people. I wanted them to understand that it could be there for them, and that's something I've been pushing.
And one way you did that is creating this program in your school called the Visiting Artist Program.
And that too, that all these things I've been doing kind of haven't been intentional. They just kind of snowballed out of other experiences. So when I started teaching, my father was still living, and I very easily just had him come in and speak to my classes, and the students loved it. And he did that quite often, and because he enjoyed doing it too. And then my colleague Scott Siebel and I both decided we all had friends, we all had connections. We would bring people in to speak, and then we just kind of formally made it a better thing by calling it the Visiting Artist Program, and formally were able to pay people proper stipends, through grants that we were able to get, So it started out kind of, I'm going to say, just loose, and then it's become a much more well-organized, well-funded thing. Because in the beginning, people came out of the graciousness of their hearts, and they still do, but, we're happy that we can give them a stipend as well.
That's so important.
Artists need to be supported for their time and their energies, and for too long, we've all been volunteering because we all love that, and everybody wants to talk to students and support young students, especially on the high school level, but, everybody should be paid for their time. So at the same time, we're trying to show the students that they should be paid for their time, and that these people are getting paid, and they probably are only getting paid a third of what they really should be getting paid, but they at least start getting acknowledged for their time.
Exactly. I mean, you're forming a sort of an advocacy, in the minds of the students even too, so when they go on, they can advocate for themselves, which is so important. I mean, I wish, I had learned that in school as well, but it's something.
Me too.
So who you mentioned, your father being one of the first professional artists to come into the school via the program. Who are some of the other individuals throughout the years who have come in and spoken with the students?
Well, most recently, last week, we just had John Yao, the poet and art critic and writer, come in, and he was able to critique our advanced placement class. The students each put up about 3 to 5 works from their sustained investigation portion of their portfolio, and he looked at that. He did, and he critiqued the seniors. So it was about 17 students, but then the sophomores and juniors in the class got to sit in and watch that critique. So that was super exciting. We were really thrilled to have him. We had Kathy Bradford a few years ago. Susan Less was the most recent visiting artist that actually had an exhibition too. We try to mix it up a lot. We don't just have, I'm going to say, just visual artists. We try to also, when they come in, have them explain how they run their creative life and how they make a living being a creative person. So we've had artists, we've had writers, we've had poets, we've had museum curators, we've had gallerists. Eric Brown, who is a painter but also was the director of the Tibor Denage Gallery, he was the speaker. Eric Orr, who's an artist and was actually the first hip-hop cartoonist, and he worked with Keith Haring. He came in and spoke about that. Jessica Stockholder, the sculptor, has come in. Whitfield LaBelle. Jason Mandela, who's a photographer who actually also lives in New Rochelle, and his children went through the high school. He came in and shared both his fine art photography, but also how he makes a living as a photographer for artist websites and for galleries. Jim Hodges has come in. Annabelle Clark, the photographer, also came in and shared both her fine art photography and her, I'm going to say, editorial photography that she's done a lot for the New York Times. We've had children's book illustrators, and then we've also had alumni. I've been there now 31 years, and we love having our alumni come back because, they've gone through the program and now are making a living, working and creating art. So our most recent was Julian Rapp, who was a painter, and also Dylan Goldberger, who went to Pratt as an illustrator and has done a ton of illustrations that are inspired by skateboards, and he's done things for Thrasher magazine and Vans sneakers and stuff. So it's really great for the students to see, previous alumni go through and make a living in that. So we try to keep it broad that way.
And it touches on all the different disciplines.
For sure. Like, I went to college with my friend Filippo Gentile, and he's the head of installation at the Brooklyn Museum. And so we actually had him speak when we went to the Brooklyn Museum to see an exhibit. I think it was the Tomaselli exhibition. And he spoke to my students in the lobby. And, for a lot of them, it was really interesting to see that I'm trying to show them that you can be in the art world and you don't have to necessarily be the artist. You could be an installer, you could be a gallerist, you could be a writer. And then Filippo was explaining that the installation crew at the Brooklyn Museum is, they get health insurance, and the artists don't. So there's all these practicalities that are really interesting and informative for the students as well.
Speaking of museums, New Rochelle High School, you have your own museum on site.
Yes. So we have the Museum of Arts and Culture, which is the only Regents-chartered museum in a public school in America, and Teresa Kump-Leghorn, who is a resident of New Rochelle, and the Fund for Excellence, which is a group, by people in New Rochelle that add extra things to the school. The Fund for Excellence funds the museum. They fund free SAT tutoring. They fund chess and poetry in schools, among many other things. So we've been able to have that for the last, I'm going to say, about 20 years or so. And we host exhibitions, and they're not just art exhibitions. I mean, the museum hosts exhibitions that go to all the disciplines in the school, science and English, etc. But we've hosted a lot of art exhibitions, and where the artists are able to come in and share their work. When Susan Less was a visiting artist, we were able to get, she had a solo show. We had two spaces, a large and a small one, and she had a solo show in the large space, and in the small space, the students were able to do an installation of their own inspired by her work. So that was really exciting.
So that's a way, too, of collaboration between both professional artists and professionals from other disciplines and the students.
Yeah. And then, having it there, it's open, obviously, to the whole school, and then it's also open. We've had, pre-COVID, the middle schools and the elementary schools would just take buses over to see exhibitions that, related to their curriculum as well. And then we always try to tie it into different things in school. So many years ago, we had an exhibition of a children's book illustrator, the Cruz family. The father, the mother, and both children were all professional illustrators. And we had an exhibition of their work and kind of showing it in stages from the drawings to the actual printed books. And then the illustrators were there to do book readings, and then the National Art Honor Society in school, they learned how to docent the exhibition, and then when the elementary kids came, the high school students were the docents for the exhibition for the elementary kids. The National Art Honor Society and the Advanced Placement classes get to have exhibitions in the gallery every year. They install their own show. So it's, we're trying to, at Rochelle High School, we try to, when they graduate, they get a full arts experience, not just making art in a wide variety of media, but they also understand like how to install it, how to promote it, how to put together an invitation and maybe a short press release. So I've had many students then go on to college and work in, different educational space galleries and or be interns at galleries or work study programs, and they're always calling me back saying, that the school has taught them so much and they went in with such skills that it was really helpful for them to get these, jobs on campus, which has been great.
Having that portfolio ahead of time is
right.
really important and
right.
just such a rare thing. It's really a formative experience all around.
No, the museum's wonderful, and again, pre-COVID, it used to be run year-round, and the director at the time we have a theater downstairs, and she would run movies, and they would have summer exhibitions. So right now, things have been on I'm going to say, a skeleton schedule because of COVID, but I'm hoping that we can bring it all back to as full a program as it was in the past.
Sure, yeah, hopefully so. That navigating around that is tough, but at least, with the students back at school, they do have a site, instead of having to go out and take public transportation to all these other cultural centers, they have a place right on campus.
Exactly. Well, the city of New Rochelle, I have to say, is a very artistic city and has many, local venues to view art and music and theater and, et cetera. And even just the public library, which is in the center of town, has a huge exhibition space right at the, I don't want to even say lobby, but just like the whole entrance of the space. And there's the New Rochelle Council for the Arts, which is probably over 100 years old, and they have exhibitions every month. So I think the city is, if anybody grows up in New Rochelle, they're surrounded by the arts from birth, for sure.
Sure, yeah, and the diversity, too, of the city is important.
Absolutely,
in playing into that, yeah, and reflected in the student body as well. I mean, the work that comes out of the school is, it's very multicultural. It's also indicative of the many different identities that the students express, too.
Oh, for sure. And we're definitely the most multicultural school, I'm going to say, in Westchester County. I think at last count we had something like 68 countries represented in New Rochelle.
Oh, wow. In general, what are some of the benefits that you've noticed when students have access to arts in school?
Well, I think just as another way of expressing yourself, right? I think not everybody is a good writer, per se. I know I'm not. But, for me to be to have visual media to express myself has always been great. And I think it's very freeing and exciting, and it just gives students another voice. Again, at my high school, we have a theater program, we have a dance program, we have an instrumental music program, we have a vocal program. So I just think Rochelle's always supported the arts and creativity in all media, So if the students aren't visual artists, they definitely have opportunities to act or sing or dance or play an instrument. So I think that, and they do that from kindergarten on, so it's just kind of part of their curriculum, which I think we're so lucky to have.
I actually grew up in Westchester, and I remember New Rochelle High School had, on the weekends, concerts, which was, that wasn't happening in any other school that I remember. So yeah, it really was fostering artistic development and a platform for local voices for the youth within the community. So I think this is a good point to ask, what do you envision for the future of education?
Well, it would be great if education could be free. I mean, get rid of college loans would be ideal. I just see teaching high school right now, the stress of the expense of college has never been greater, So many of my students that used to go to private schools, or private colleges or universities are choosing the SUNY route because of expense. And then that's also making it more difficult for the students that are in the SUNY program. That's becoming more and more competitive because of that, or students are applying to schools and really making their decision on who gives them a bigger scholarship as opposed to maybe what they really, what their first choice really would be. And school debt is really crippling, so I would love to see that change in the future. I would like to see the arts just be more supported, in general, because of course, like everything else, we've had cutbacks financially, with things. And I think the reason it's still happening in the schools is really due to the diligence of the staff, of really making things happen and being frugal and, doing the best we can to continue programs that are not funded as much as they were in the past, but we don't want to lose them. So that kind of thing. I just think the arts in general, if that could be funded more on all levels, from pre-K, kindergarten, and up, and not just in Rochelle, I just think in America,
Yeah, that's so important. I mean, everyone deserves the access to information and the ability to freely express themselves, and also see themselves being represented in the culture at large. It would also be great if there were more instances of art and education making the mainstream media when it doesn't involve a book or a work of art being banned.
For sure. I mean, the book banning, the most recent with, Art Spiegelman's Mouse, that's just so crazy. The recent book banning kind of feels like the Jesse Helms era of the 80s, right? So,
Yep.
Yeah, I think just politics in general, it would be great if we could just start focusing on, the planet and people's creativity and their health and less politics.
Yeah.
Less negative politics, I'll say.
I agree, but certainly having artwork that fills the halls of the schools and a designated designated safe space where people can come and create and discuss.
Right.
It would be great if that could be more widespread.
I agree. I think we're very lucky living where we are, and the students are very close to Manhattan, and to have all these, we'll take the students, to the museum, to the Met or something, and I'll say, look around and see how multicultural, and international the audience is here. People planned trips to fly to New York to come to the Met, and you guys got here in under an hour on a bus. Think about how lucky you are.
Yeah, just to recognize that and not take that for granted, right?
Right. It's just in their own backyard, and when we plan trips to the museum, I know this is not the best thing to say publicly, but we don't go through the education department. We usually have the bus drop us off a block away, and I teach the kids how to walk in the front door and go to the admission thing and table and pay $1 because it's suggested admission, and pay $1 and walk in. And I'm trying to show them that this is here for you, and you can walk in anytime you want. You don't need to come with your teacher. You don't need to pay the full suggested admission. That it's here and that it's accessible, and that also every other museum that I give them lists of places that they can go and what night is free and which night. Of course everything has a fee, but there's always at least one night that it's free to the public, and how to find that out, and things like that. So I think it's really important for them to be able to go and do these things on their own.
Well, that's a great form of experiential learning in and of itself. And you talked about accessibility too, and the fact is that these schools too are it's not, Westchester, people think of it's an affluent district overall, but that's not the case. Yeah, right.
Of course it is. Yeah, in the scheme of things, of course Westchester is, but not necessarily. Our school, we have, students on, assisted lunch programs, and we have millionaires, right? So we have people living in Section 8 housing in Rochelle, and people, that don't need that at all. So I think Westchester County is a wide, people assume it's all wealthy, but it's absolutely not.
Right. And that too plays into, the dichotomy and the gap between the access to cultural programs, and also in the students and their families' minds feeling welcome in these institutions. So
Exactly right. Which is why we try to bring them in and show them, hey, see how you just walked in and paid $1? You can come back here next Saturday with your family and do the same thing, or you can come on family night, or, this night, Friday night's the Guggenheim's free, or whatever, for them just to understand that, how to look through a website, how to see, the hours and what's open, and those kind of things that, it's complicated for some people. They don't know how to navigate these things. It's not so evident. People walk in and pay full admission at the Met, even though it says suggested admission, because it just has that kind of thing. Even walking into galleries now, sometimes it just seems, exclusive or not welcoming to people, and I want them to understand that it is.
Right. Yeah, they need to see themselves represented more. And I think,
yes, for sure.
I think that by having such a well-rounded and deep program that encompasses all the arts and also gives them access in their own school to become experts in the field is very helpful. They can really control the narrative of their own work and how to communicate symbolically, and also to formulate a greater understanding for what their peers are experiencing and symbolizing and communicating.
Yes.
So it's
for sure.
It's such an amazing model, and I'm inspired by it, and I wish that more schools would take note and incorporate this within their curricula.
Oh, well, thank you. They can listen to this podcast and they can copy it and do it in their own schools. Completely great.
So how could they see, speaking of which, is there a website sort of with the Visiting Artist Program and museum past and present and future happenings?
The Museum of Arts and Culture is listed on the Rochelle High School website. The website is it is being updated literally as we speak. We have a new department chair, Mr. Deepak Marwa, and he's been updating the performing and visual arts portion of the website. And we are trying to update we've had 20 years of wonderful exhibitions at the museum, but like anything else, I think we just need an intern to get it all updated for sure. But yeah, there definitely is, you can peruse it and see past things for sure.
Well, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today about the incredible program, and thank you listeners for tuning in.